Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Excuses for Kings by the band The Catch.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
So today's episode doesn't have any favorite bits, blah blah blah. I'm not gonna make any jokes, I've done plenty of them in the past, but I believe it was Clay Walnum who said that there could be made a correlation between the amount of favorite bits that I have from an album and the overall rating I give to it, and you can devise that into a formula, and I believe that if said formula did exist right now, you'd be able to pretty accurately point out my rating for this album already. So firstly, before we even get into anything, let me put this one out of the way. This album isn't bad, and I know plenty of people who would enjoy listening to this one, although I don't believe that anyone would look at this one and think that it's a masterpiece. But to me specifically, this one was highly boring and very much forgettable. So you see, today's album is yet another very obscure album, much like yesterday's, and this one is an interesting one because apparently I am not the first one to review this album over on YouTube. Now that's quite an interesting thing, but it gets even more interesting when you realize the first and only person to review this one was actually Pete from the Sea of Tranquility, and if you by any chance don't know who Sea of Tranquility is, he's probably the biggest prog reviewer on the platform. Now to be fair, in 2021 when this album was released, Pete was approached by the band themselves and asked to review the album himself. Now I don't believe that his review is biased in any way, and I listened to most of it and it seems to be very much, unbiased, just his straight opinions about this album, and they sound quite right actually. But personally, I was not approached by the band to review this album, and someone, whoever I don't know, recommended this album to me, and I would highly think that someone probably saw this album and discovered it through Sea of Tranquility, listened to it, liked it, and recommended it to me. But despite all of that and this slight exposure, this album still remains to be very obscure, with only 6 monthly listeners over on Spotify, which is 2 more than Kaylin Lloyd and even 4 more than Sylv. If you don't know what these two names mean, don't worry, they're so obscure. Now there's really not a lot of backstory or information I can give you about today's album. The only thing I could really figure out is that The Catch are a 2-man band, but that doesn't mean that there's only 2 players playing on this entire album, but I honestly really don't know how many members are to be found on The Catch, and that's about it because I don't have a prog archives page to go off of, and honestly there's really not a lot of information about this online. But what I can tell you about this album is what does it sound like and what do I think of it. Now the short and sweet answer to this would be this album is a definitive neo-prog album. Now I haven't used the term neo-prog in a while on this channel, so I believe I have to do a quick recap of it. So you know how we have the subgenre of neo-prog. It's fine and all, I guess, and I'm not the biggest fan of this subgenre, but if there's one thing that really doesn't seem logical to me is the fact that the 2 albums such as Meridian's Script for a Gesture's Tear and Arena's Conjunction are both considered to be in the same subgenre of music. And the only reason from the get-go that we even have this progressive rock subgenres is to make the entire branches of prog more distinct from one another. But I find neo-prog to be something very much controversial because you have a lot of very good, progressively made albums on it, as well as just a lot of basic contemporary trash that's also considered to be neo-prog. And that's why I devised the name neo-prog, because I believe it to better describe albums that came out mostly after the year of 2000 that are more like contemporary music than actual prog, mostly coming out of bands that did some sort of progressive rock in the past or maybe tried their hand at it, but then went on to create much more mainstream music. And The Catch and Excuses for Kings, which is by the way their only album as of now, is definitely a neo-prog album. On the surface level, this isn't necessarily a bad album, and each and every one of the songs is fine to listen to, I guess. I really didn't suffer that much through each and every song. I thought that most, if not all of them, were mediocre, but it all comes crashing down when you listen to this one as an entire album from front to back. You see, this album is, how should I say it? It's boring as fuck. Like, it really is boring, and the only redemption I can find with it is that it's only 42 minutes long, because it could have easily been an hour and even an hour and a half long, and I would totally suffer through it. Now, let me be quite honest with you all. These days, I am filled to the brim with work, and work that isn't related to this channel at all, and I have to put a lot of time and effort into it, but of course I want to produce an episode of this series each and every day, so I find the time and I do so. Now, the only point of real redemption that I have with making these series, at least nowadays, is getting to listen to some really good music. So whenever an album like this pops off, I just listen to this one, and I get stressed while I listen to it, because at the essence of it, I'm really just wasting my time instead of doing actual meaningful work. So yeah, I'm not gonna rant about this album anymore. I will have to say that as one entire listen, I didn't enjoy it, but I can definitely see people that like bands like Anubis or Arena or Jadis to actually pretty much enjoy this album. As I said, it's not a masterpiece, I think, by anyone's standards, but it's definitely not bad for the ones who like this sort of music. So if you think that you're gonna like this and you overall really like Neo Prog, then you might as well check this one out. Alas, I was yet again deceived, thinking that an album with a good cover has to be a good album. Herder, it's not how it works, but I always keep forgetting that. But overall, I do believe that this is a lovely cover, and I love the velvety base color that it has, which overlays everything on it, and of course you have some really nice representations on here. So for instance, you have what I firstly believe to be a flower coming out in the front center of this album, but apparently this isn't a flower, and these aren't petals, but instead this is a paper crown. And this goes of course quite well with the theme of this album, which is kings and medieval, I guess, and stuff like that. I really don't know if this is a concept album, but it surely didn't feel like one. And of course you have the ruins, the ancient ruins in the foreground, and then you have sort of these very sorta almost torn down high-rise buildings in the background, showing that whatever progress we made, it always will become ancient at some point and will free up space for something new to come. And another upside that this cover has, and especially it has to be the band logo. I like its sans serif font. I think it's very distinct, it looks good, and it overall does fit the mood that this album tries to convey. So yeah, at the end of the day, the only way to summarize this would be good cover, bad album. So unfortunately, and this is highly subjective, I do believe, this album left me with a very bitter taste in my mouth, and thus it will be getting a very shameful rating of 4 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to Up the Downstair by Porcupine Tree. Now unfortunately, Porcupine Tree isn't a band that was proven favorable to me in the past, so hopefully I wouldn't have to suffer through it tomorrow, but we'll see it when it comes to it. And I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Wadham, Rest of Kings, and Lindsay. Hey Cox, you guys are the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye guys.